For anyone who has ever really, truly loved a pet, the thought of saying goodbye is just heartbreaking. It's a pain we all understand. But what if science offered a way to kind of cheat death? Let's unpack this, because what used to be pure science fiction is now a real commercial service you can buy today. And this isn't some distant future concept. We're talking about huge celebrities like Barbara Streisand and even some regular pet owners paying sums that could easily buy a new car, all to create a genetic twin of their companion. The technology is here, it's now, and it forces us to ask some really deep and frankly pretty uncomfortable questions. That's the emotional hook, right? That's the promise, the hope that you could hold a piece of your best friend in your arms again. But is that what cloning really delivers? So, to get to the bottom of this, we're going to break it all down. We'll start with that emotional promise, then we'll dive right into the science. We'll talk about the shocking price tag and what that money actually gets you. We'll get into the tough ethical debates. And at the end, we'll land on the one big question you really have to ask yourself. It all kicks off with this very human desire to hold on, to preserve a connection that means the absolute world to us. And you guessed it, companies are now capitalizing on that exact hope. Companies like ViaGen Pets in the US and Sooam Biotech over in South Korea have basically turned this high-level science into a marketplace. They're offering a service that feels like it's straight out of a movie, bringing some version of your pet back to you. But how on earth do they do it? All right, so how does the sci-fi tech work in the real world? Well, the name for the process sounds super complex, but the core idea is actually surprisingly simple to wrap your head around. This is probably the best way to think about it. You are not resurrecting your old pet. You're creating its identical twin. Just, one that's born a lot later. That's the fundamental scientific reality we've got to start with. The fancy scientific term for this magic trick is somatic cell nuclear transfer, or SCNT for short. Basically, think of it like this. Scientists take the complete genetic instruction manual, the DNA, from your original pet, and they hit reboot by putting it inside a new donor egg. So here's the step-by-step. It all starts with a little skin sample from your pet. Then in the lab, scientists carefully pull out the nucleus. That's the part of the cell with all the DNA. They transfer that nucleus into a donor egg cell that's had its own DNA removed. A tiny electrical zap gets the new cell dividing, creating an embryo, which then gets implanted into a surrogate mother. And this technology has a pretty wild history. It all kicked off with Dolly the sheep back in '96, which, completely blew people's minds. Then the first cat, who was cleverly named Carbon Copy, came along in 2001. But cloning a dog, that turned out to be a massive scientific challenge. It actually wasn't until 2005 that Snoopy the dog was born, which just shows how tricky dog reproductive biology really is. Okay, so the science is there, it's possible, but for most of us, the very next question is the biggest hurdle of all. How much does this cost? And yeah, you might want to sit down for this. So the journey starts way before you even decide to go through with the full cloning. Just to preserve your pet's tissue, to take that first skin sample and put the DNA on ice, you're looking at about $1,600. Think of it as a down payment on hope. And now for the main event. If you pull the trigger and go through with it, cloning a dog with a US company like ViaGen will set you back a cool $50,000. Yeah, we're not talking about a big vet bill anymore. We're in new luxury car or down payment on a house territory. And it can go even higher. Some international labs, like Sooam Biotech in South Korea, charge up to $100,000 for the same procedure. This isn't just a service, it's a full-blown luxury good. And when you put these numbers in perspective, it is absolutely staggering. I mean, for the price of cloning one dog, you could adopt hundreds of animals from shelters, or buy an entire group of purebred puppies. The cost is just in a totally different universe. Which brings up the most important question of all. What are you actually getting for all that cash? This right here is where that emotional promise collides with a hard scientific reality. A lot of people hope they're getting their exact same pet back, soul and all. But that's just not what cloning can do. Here's the truth of it. You get the same genetic blueprint, okay? So the clone is probably going to look incredibly similar. But what's different? Well, pretty much everything else. The personality, the behaviors, those little unique quirks you loved. That stuff isn't just stored in the DNA.
It's shaped by the environment, by experiences, by training. You can't clone a memory. And look, this isn't just a theory. Listen to the people who've actually done it. A woman named Danielle Tarantella cloned her dog, and she said that while the physical match was amazing, the personality differences were, in her words, significant. It's a genetic echo, not a reincarnation. So beyond the money and the emotional reality check, there's another price being paid here. And it's one that raises some huge ethical questions about this whole business.
Behind every single successful clone, there is a staggering biological cost. The process is incredibly inefficient. The success rate, the chance of creating a viable embryo that actually leads to a live birth, is shockingly low. We're talking somewhere between just 1 and 5%. Now think about what that means. For every one cloned puppy, there can be dozens, maybe even hundreds of failed attempts.
And that incredibly low success rate leads to a whole bunch of ethical problems. To get that one success, you need a lot of surrogate mother dogs. They have to go through hormone treatments and invasive procedures for pregnancies that are, by design, probably going to fail. The clones themselves can have more health problems and maybe even shorter lives. And all of this is happening while millions of perfectly healthy, loving animals are put down in shelters every year. It really makes you ask, are we starting to treat life like a product to be manufactured?
So, after all that, the science, the cost, the ethics, we come right back to the beginning. We've looked at the dream and we've looked at the reality. So what's the big takeaway here? Here's the bottom line. Cloning gives you a genetic twin, a living link to a pet you adored, but it is not a resurrection. The price tag alone puts it out of reach for almost everybody. And even if you can't afford it, you have to accept that you're getting a brand new, unique animal. And all of that is built on a process that comes with some very serious ethical questions. And that leads us to the final question, the one I want to leave with you. This one strips away all the practical stuff and gets right to the heart of it. If money were no object, if you had all the money in the world, would you do it? Would that chance to have a genetic twin be worth it all? This is a tough one. Be honest down in the comments.